Hello, and welcome to our inaugural episode of Capital for Change, a podcast powered by the New Community Transformation Fund. In each episode, we'll explore the real stories behind the bold investments, profiling the business leaders, fund recipients, and partners who are creating lasting transformation across West Michigan and far beyond. This podcast series was created to give you an insider's perspective on how capital can do more than just grow businesses. It can build community, create opportunity, and inspire a new economic future. We're excited to introduce the first episode of Capital for Change. Today I'm in studio with the visionaries behind a fund that's helping to rewrite the playbook on venture capital. The founders of the New Community Transformation Fund, Scott Welch and Birgit Close, both from Grand Rapids, and welcome. In this inaugural episode, we've got a backstory to tell and a lot more to cover. I appreciate you both being here. And this is a pretty amazing story that I've heard a few times, but it changes every time I hear the story. So I'm going to start with you, Scott Welch, and then later on, Birgit Close comes in. There's some amazing intersections of ideology that happen here along the way. This is a conversation that took place a number of years ago. Scott Welch, set the scene for us, if you will, please.
Well, first of all, thanks, Phil. Birgit and I, we've been friends for many, many years. And so we would have our time to get together and just, have lunch over different topics. And I was just coming back from Durban, South Africa, and we met at our lunch place, and she began to talk about this idea of creating generational wealth within communities of color. And interestingly enough, I just had a conversation with someone in South Africa talking about the exact same thing, but over there. And so when I held up my phone and I heard her talk about her idea, I said, "You got to see this. This is pretty amazing." And I said, "We have to talk further about this." And so she began to tell me more. And we knew at that point in time that we had to act on it. I mean, she had been through different sessions and working with parts of the government and going to these sessions, and she'll talk more about that, where she just got fatigued about hearing it. She wanted to do something. And I said, well, yeah, we should do something about it. And so that's where it began. And from there, we called a colleague who had also set up a fund on the West Coast, and we brought it in and put it on a whiteboard, talked about kind of the efficacy, the idea, and we began to, go from there. And so Birgit can take the story from that part because there's so many parts to it. So,
and I want to back up a little bit. Birgit, You got tired of hearing this discussed at conferences and meetings, and so that was a part of the impetus for you saying to Scott, yes, I want to be involved with this. Did I get that part of this right?
Not quite, but I'll
okay.
Tell you. I was a participant in a very extensive program through the Kellogg Foundation around diversity, equity, and inclusion. And this took place over 2 years. It concluded in October of 2018. And when we were all finished, we talked a lot in these sessions about the disadvantages people of color have had for many decades, whether that is in housing or lending or whatever you have. And at the end of all of that, I asked myself, that I've been an economic developer, 33 years with Right Place, but I've been in economic development for 45 years. So I looked at myself when I came home after that last session and said, so what is my role that I can play in rectifying some of these inequities? I mean, literally, I'm not kidding. I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning and I said, it's always money. So many things need capital. And if you look at the venture capital scene across the United States, there is very little of hundreds of millions of dollars that get invested, and maybe 2 to 4%, 4 at the high end, get invested in entrepreneurs of color, right? And so I made myself a note, and the next morning I called him and said, we have to have lunch. And this is in October. He said, well, I know somebody first of all, it's a great idea. So let's do it. And I kind of had made up my mind already that we need to do something that will make a difference. and job creation and opportunities. That's part of my DNA for all those decades. And you always think that when the tide rises, all boats rise. Not always, I found. And you can talk about, well, pull yourself up or your bootstrings, but if you don't have any boots, there's nothing to pull. So he called a friend, as he said, on the West Coast. And on November 1st, in my office, just across the street here, we mapped out the idea of a fund and wrote a business plan and started moving on it.
Yeah.
So that's how this all happened.
So the inspiration was really very much of the fact that you got this inspiration or this idea that it needed to be undone. The timing was right. Scott's there, and all the pieces came together.
Mm-hmm. Well, and also, too, Phil, so my background is global consulting. I've been doing that for over 25 years now, and it's me coming back from overseas. But, I live in West Michigan, and our kids are fourth generation Grand Rapidians, and so I really understood what she was saying, and I knew that the need was there, and I've always been thinking about, how our community could be stronger, and it can only be stronger if everybody's strong. And so we knew that this was, this was an idea whose time had come. And because of my background, I knew that, kind of the landscape of West Michigan from a diversity and inclusion lens, I knew that we needed to do something. And we, really for years, the conversation had just really kind of gone in circles. There's all kinds of research. There's all kinds of white papers. At the end of the day, theory's good. And but it just didn't move anywhere. And so when Birgit talked to me about it, I just knew that, we're both people of action. And so we made that decision to do what it took to get it done. And so we began with that.
In spite of the fact you knew there would be challenges, whether you launched it in Grand Rapids, Michigan, or Boise, Idaho, there would be challenges. Let's talk about some of those bigger challenges that you faced right off the bat.
Well, I mean, you have to remember that, first of all, when you start a venture capital fund, and let me just tell folks, venture capital is risk capital, okay? And that's a new thing for a lot of people. We have some very fine venture capital funds here in Grand Rapids. We have the Michigan Capital Network and several others. But a specific fund directed at entrepreneurs of color hadn't really been done before. So that's one challenge. But it also takes money to start a fund. And I don't mean the investors. It takes money for the lawyers. And the gentleman from the West Coast, he became our consultant. He didn't come free. So we need to and I'm still running the right place. Well, I didn't have any money in my budget to pay lawyers. And besides which, an economic development organization generally can't do that kind of work. But my board let me do it because they saw the need as well. And they thought that what the community needed was that kind of a program or that kind of a fund, okay? So they didn't object at all. And it really is economic development, so it fit. But we had to find money to start it. And so that was the first hurdle. And when we sat down, we looked around and said, who of the corporations in this community have made a deep, deep commitment to investing in communities of color? Well, it was Bank of America. They made a national commitment. And so once we had our business plan together, we started pitching B of A here in town. And shout out to Renee Tabin, who was fantastic,
yes,
but who brought together other leaders of Bank of America from headquarters.
I want to go back to that. When you had that meeting with Renee Tabin, or you're talking with her on the phone, her first reaction, do you recall what it was? Because this is a new, bold idea, this venture capital fund aimed at people of color. What did Renee say?
Well, I wasn't privy to the initial conversation, but Renee was there. She got it.
Yep.
And she knew that it was really an opportunity. And as Birgit said, Bank of America, they were already on their way down that path, right? And so when Renee said yes after her conversation with Birgit, she got excited about it as well, because I think over time when people talk about things, and then finally someone comes to the table and they're going to do something about that thing, that's also something that people can, scratch off their wish list, because now we're finally going to get some traction. And Renee was there, so Bank of America was the first of those to help us as we set up the fund.
No, I have to
yes.
add, though, that one of the hurdles, she got it, but we had a number of meetings, and a lot of the folks in the upper echelons of the bank were wondering why this wasn't a grant program. They wanted to make it.
Yes.
They wanted to make it a grant program.
Yes.
It's simpler. It's less messy.
Well,
Of course.
and it fits within their paradigm.
Right.
Yes.
Right? So, and as Birgit said, too, they wanted to make it something around subsidized housing or a grant program. And that was actually one of the hurdles I was going to mention, because we ran into that a number of times.
Correct.
Yeah. People, and I want to stop you right there. People had a hard time wrapping their head about venture capital for people of
Yes.
color.
Exactly.
Let's get it right down to the foundation.
Yes.
Exactly right. And that's exactly right. And so, in fact, there was a group of community leaders from other nonprofits who took me to task on why I didn't ask for permission to start this. And A, I didn't think I needed permission. And B, if I had created a committee with Scott and I had created a committee, we would probably still be talking about it.
So true.
Right.
And I wanted a racehorse and not, a camel or whatever.
Yeah.
But this idea that a person of color doesn't have the fortitude and brains and smarts to make money in a venture, and that he or she can only make it by handing out a grant, was insulting to me.
Yes. And it was insulting to the population, too. And on top of that, there were at least some, around the United States, maybe our numbers in the city and in the region are low, but you can actually go just across the state and see some major, some very large organizations owned by folks of color, and you can go around the United States and find some. Our venture capital fund was different, right? It was different in that regard, but in terms of strong, healthy businesses, you can find those around the United States. And so what we bumped up against was this paradigm, because a lot of folks hadn't seen it before. And so, and that's really where either your friendship circle is not wide enough, or you don't travel, or something gets lost in translation. And so that was one of the hurdles that we had to keep addressing.
Yeah, leveraging those relationships, but also building off of Bank America.
Yep.
So let's talk about what is next. Who are some of the next key conversations and players you spoke with?
So Bank of America eventually wrote a $250,000 check as our startup capital for the fund. And back 6 years ago now, I had a breakfast with Garrick Ruschow, who is now the CEO of Consumers, but then was the number 2. And we had breakfast up there on the porch of the hotel. And he said, we're thinking about doing some more things in economic development in West Michigan. Birgit, what can we do? And I said, well, let me share a crazy idea with you that Scott and I are working on. And so I rolled out the idea of the fund, and he said, do you have a document? I said, yeah, we have a deck. So he took it back to Patty Poppe, who at that time was the CEO. And of course, Patty is now in California. And it didn't take very long for them to say, here's $250,000.
So true.
And so there was $500,000. And then a few months after that, we also approached DTE, and they gave us another $100,000, and we were off and running. So we had our base capital where we could go to our friends at Lauren Andrulis at Warner and start doing documents and laying out the whole idea and creating the new Community Transformation Fund.
And some of these people bought in immediately. Some needed convincing. You had to leverage that relationship you had with them. Let's talk about some of those people who perhaps needed a little more gentle persuasion or stronger Birgit and Scott persuasion as we have these conversations.
Raising funds, it was pretty interesting.
We didn't. That's so true.
So here, we announced the fund in my conference room in January of 2020.
2020, that's right. We started.
So we did the fund development, in other words, all the documents over over 2019. Okay, remember, we wrote the business plan in late 2018. We refined it. We raised that $600,000, and then in January of 2020, we announced it.
Yeah.
We had generally positive response.
We really, really did. And part of it.
Except for
Go ahead. No.
except for social media, where I almost cried because the commentary was so distasteful and hurtful that, well, yeah, we're going to need another, party store and on Division Street and that kind of commentary.
Really?
Yeah,
Yes.
we remember that.
Oh,
Phil.
yes. Oh,
yeah,
yeah.
we remember.
So you announced this is on social media. It's a big deal. It is a groundbreaking moment
Correct.
Yes.
in terms of venture capital, not only in West Michigan but around the country.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it's met with that. And underlying
With
all of this,
disdain and
underlying all of this, and you,
racism, frankly.
Yeah. Right. Thank you.
you and I, Scott Welch, have spoken about this for years on the radio and off the radio. Underlying all of this is the reality, in spite of many people denying it, that institutional racism is
Absolutely.
still very much
Absolutely.
alive and operating as you are launching this groundbreaking venture capital fund, the new Community Transformation Fund.
Yes.
But let's not discount the fact it took two people who knew this was the right thing to do in spite of those trivial but sad social media commentaries. It had to happen. But let's talk a little bit bigger in terms of the reaction once this fund is announced. This is early 2020. There were some people who were a little taken aback, if you will, some that were surprised, some that were a bit miffed that they were not consulted,
Right.
Yes.
if you will.
Permission. I call it permission.
Were you, I want to ask both of you, were you surprised by that reaction?
We weren't surprised. We knew there'd be some headwinds, first of all. But flip that over. I remember our first LP, right, was
first limited partner. So
yeah, I'm sorry.
So
First
we
limited
start,
partner.
we
That's
start
right.
raising money now. Okay.
Yes.
After that announcement, now what are you going to do? You have to start raising.
Got to raise
funds.
capital.
And
Right.
our goal was $10 million. Okay.
That's so true.
Yeah. It was,
And I want to stop you right there. Why 10 million? Why was that
we
important?
thought it was achievable.
Right.
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 And anything less doesn't really give you enough capital to invest. Okay. I mean, then don't even start.
You need some managerial help as well, right?
Right.
To pay
And you
staff
have to pay.
and things like that as well.
Well, not only that, as you said, Birgit Close, as we kind of go back in this story, you need seed money. You need lawyers. You need people to draw up the vision. You need that consultant who says, yes, you do this, don't do that. Those are all key elements. But that $10 million also makes a strong statement.
Yeah.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did. We actually initially thought we could get to 25, and eventually we still might somewhere down the road. But to be honest, we were pleasantly surprised and elated on how we raised the first few $1 million.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and which is interesting, we only had 2 meetings in person, Phil.
Right.
And I remember walking to, at the time, Spectrum Health.
Spectrum Health. Yeah.
And,
now Corewell Health.
Coral, right? And Birgit had set up a meeting. It was raining outside. And I remember we went into the building, and I think this was essentially was our first meeting. We walked in and met with
Matt Cox, who is the CFO now of Corewell
yes,
and has been there for some time. And Tina Friestecker, the CEO of Corewell, then Spectrum, had turned the meeting over to Matt.
yeah, and so Matt.
They had clearly talked about it.
That's exactly right. So Matt took the meeting, and then Birgit and I are sitting there, and I think the meeting lasts all of 15 minutes. So we get up. Thanks so much, Matt. He says, hold that thought and just don't leave yet. He runs around to Tina's office, and within 15 minutes, we're getting on the elevator. He says, yeah, we got $1 million for you. Now, what was interesting about that is I didn't know what I didn't know for me. I was like, should it be that easy? Because I didn't know. Right. And people were like, no, that's like
Literally,
pretty amazing.
It was a 15-minute meeting. He said, anything else I can do for you?
Yeah, and that was
no,
it.
Matt, thank you very much. And we're gone.
Had you asked for an amount?
And we wanted $1 million.
$1 million.
Yeah.
And
he
it's
said, yes.
just like, yes.
15 minutes.
Right, 15
And so
minutes, yeah.
that was
So to this day, I mean, we really shout out to Tina Stecker and Matt who really got it
So true.
and who were very, very supportive and on board immediately.
From the very
and that
beginning.
Really, to say that organization did $1 million right out of the gate
Yes.
gave us a lot of credibility.
Sure did. So think about that, Phil.
No hesitation.
Right.
I mean, literally, give me 15 minutes. You
was
get the
done.
CEO, Tina gives it a green light, and it's done.
Again, I was like, I said, Birgit, that was easy. Like, is that how that's supposed to go? She's like, yeah, sure, I guess. Why not? And so, but you think about the branch. You think Bank of America, DT Energy Foundation. You think of Consumers Energy, and then you think of Spectrum Health, now Corewell Health. I mean, you see these really illustrious brands saying yes, and that also made we were given momentum at a very early part of the fund. Now again, with the framework of COVID at the time, so I actually think that's even a more important part of the story, because the world was going through turmoil, and yet here we are raising a fund. That was a headwind that no one saw, but yet it didn't stop. People showed up to the meetings online, and
we had a call with John Kennedy. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
John, of course, is in my mind, one of the absolute most fantastic employers in Kent County and in West Michigan. At that time, he has Auto at one point, which he sold, and now it's AutoCam Medical. His family is deeply, deeply involved in the community, in education, etc. And I reached out to him, and of course, he was still on the Right Place board. He's been on the Right Place board for a number of years. At one point, he was my board chair, and just a fantastic person. And so we laid it all out. It was a Zoom call or a Teams call, and it equally was not even a 15-minute call. And we had our consultant from California on that call, and he's like, whoa, because John said, okay, I can do $1 million, anything else you need.
And that was it.
So Scott now has the impression that you can raise $1 million at a time in 2-minute calls. It didn't quite go that way later on, but
it was never crazy hard.
It was never crazy hard.
No.
You had to be blown away by that at some level, though.
Mm-hmm. And another thing, too, and hats off to our community and these really amazing business leaders. Part of what we were doing also was to displace the narrative of the Fortune magazine article that happened some time ago. But a lot of folks, it happened later on. But let's report that news. Let's report this news right here, where look at what our city's doing. And they put their money where their mouth was, right? I mean, it was just pretty amazing. And that's the stuff you want to see get more press, right, and more news.
Absolutely.
Because to me, that's a different narrative.
And part of the powerful aspect of this story, there are many parts, are the people along the way that you had conversations with.
Yeah.
Many of those you'll be hearing in upcoming episodes of this podcast, which really unpack a powerful story here behind the creation of the new Community Transformation Fund, stakeholders, the players. Really, what I'm hearing, and I know listeners of this conversation are hearing, you're leveraging some valuable relationships. 33 years at the Right Place, Birgit Close. You've got a Rolodex, to use a very outdated term in 2025.
Nobody knows what that is
to match anybody, or you've got at least an iPhone database that can pull up anybody. Board members, friends, associates. Scott Welch, you're certainly no 90-pound weakling compared to Birgit's list. But let's get real here for a moment.
Yes.
Those people you can trust, like John Kennedy, people you know are good people to the core, who you could trust that idea with. Was that the foundational approach for finding the right people here, Birgit?
Absolutely. We sat down and made a list. And who do we know?
Yep.
Who do we know has the means, okay? Not everybody can say, I can do $1 million. Now, you also have to remember, they don't write $1 million check. They make a commitment for $1 million or $500,000 or $250,000. And then as we make investments, we call on that money, okay?
Yes.
So it doesn't sit in a bank account, draw an interest. But we made that list and said, who do we know? Who do we have a good relationship with? Who do we know has a heart and a mind for this? Who understands venture capital, that it's risk capital, because there are rules that come with that, right? There are federal rules. You cannot be a venture capitalist if you cannot afford to lose $1 million. Let's not forget.
Yep.
It's risk capital, right?
Yep.
And then we didn't get yeses from everybody we asked, for sure. But I can also tell you that our relationship that we established with Bank of America paid off, because they became a $2 million investor in the fund
Yes.
as a limited partner.
Yes.
And when Moynihan, the CEO, announced Bank of America's investments in venture capital for communities of color, there was San Francisco, there was New York, and there was Grand Rapids
Grand Rapids.
It's remarkable.
on the list. And he announced it on CNN in the morning.
Sure
And
did.
we were like blown away. I
Yeah.
mean, there are all these funds in all these big cities.
Yeah.
And here was Grand Rapids, and most people are like, huh?
Yeah.
But they did it. And then Gentex Corporation,
Yes.
okay, fabulous business, obviously, in Zealand.
Yes.
Talked to the CEO, Steve Downing, absolutely, Birgit. And, and then we reached $9,750,000 at the end of about a year and a half, okay?
That's nothing short of remarkable.
No, but I wanted to say it was $10 million at the end of that year. And so I sent him an email saying, are you up for another $250,000? I happened to be on a sub board at Gentex. He walked out of the office and says, oh, by the way, I didn't answer that email, but you're good to go. So it was $10 million by Christmas, so.
Well, and remember, there were some folks that said, I forgot what the number was exactly, though, Phil, but they said, well, something like this hasn't happened where over $5 million have been raised before.
Yes, correct.
And notice that we started with our bar set very high, because $5 million came pretty easy. And so it was one of those things where we passed it and we're like, we're going to keep going.
Absolutely.
Right. And so again, it just made sense. I think the timing was good. And again, one of the things too, we never sold the, I guess, quote unquote, the struggle of the communities of color. We sold invest in the potential.
Correct.
What would happen if? And so it was all upside. And so really this is this is a very strategic tool in our community because one, it actually articulates our commitment to the community. The second thing I think that it does is it shows that what happens when you can actually invest in the potential, right, of a working business, because they have to be what we say, they have to be post-revenue. They have to be making money to some degree already.
All right.
But what happens when you give them money to scale? And that's really what NCTF is all about, and we prove that.
And I don't want our listeners to overlook what you just said, which is this could have been sold as a guilt story or as a charity story.
And we
Look at these
did.
missed opportunities that are wrong, and we need to correct this. No, this was about selling a powerful, exciting vision that no one was doing, and you cannot discount the fact that that is highly attractive, especially for people who knew they needed to be in that space.
Right. Well, and if we wanted to just have charity, then we would have made it a grant program.
There you go.
But
Exactly.
you can do that through a foundation, okay?
And that's what
That's
this was
not what
not.
we wanted.
Right.
We wanted to invest in businesses that have scalability, that create wealth for the owner
Yes.
and for the community. Remember, my job has always been to get investment and to create jobs.
Indeed.
And that's what this is all about.
And the playbook actually was built around that, right?
Investment and jobs.
Yes.
Right.
And then surround the companies just like Birgit had done. The investment jobs and then building an ecosystem around these business owners, right? So whatever they needed, if it was office space, if it was other connections, if it was potential customers, whatever relationship, that was the playbook of the right place, right? And so we actually just brought that playbook into NCTF. So
Not a bad playbook to steal a few
proven,
pages out
right?
of.
And it's
at all.
proven, right?
Well, that's what I knew how to do.
Yeah. So you got
Yeah.
capital, but after the capital, there's more than just capital. You need relationships. You need office space. You need many things. And
Well,
so
you need idea
it was
people too.
holistic.
People who will help you along the way, right?
Right. I mean, think about it. If you said something very important a couple of minutes ago, and that is we leveraged our relationships to get the appointments, to talk about the fund and raise the money.
Yes.
What a lot of entrepreneurs of color don't have is that network of relationships, okay?
Yeah.
You know, all of us here, the three of us here, when we need something, we know exactly when to pick up the phone and who to call. And that doesn't always happen. But there is, when you have the money, but you may also need an attorney. You may need an HR professional. You may need some other advice. We just invested in a young woman and she needs some mentoring on how to put a board together. Okay, so I found a couple of people who can do that. So that's what else we bring to the party.
Yes.
We know the community and we know the state of Michigan quite well, obviously. And so what else can we bring to the party? And one place where I saw that done better than anywhere I've ever seen it done, and that's in Israel. Okay, over the past 30 plus years, they have established these innovation centers and surround these entrepreneurs with all this help, right? So that once you get kicked out of the innovation center and you're on your own, then you have a cadre of people that you can call and say, I have a question. Okay.
Yeah, you've got that network right
Got
there.
that network.
Yes.
So
And-
that's the other thing that
And you just referenced Birgit Close. Scott Welch is with us, co-founders of the New Community Transformation Fund. You just referenced, I believe, Dre Wallace,
Yes.
an opener, one of the people
Yes.
that is a part of this story.
Yes.
We have many others that you will meet in our upcoming episodes, which are really important because they help tell the story in not only greater depth, but really some aspects of the story that are incredibly powerful, that almost paint the picture of this was meant to happen. Not only those great leverage relationships, but because of the people involved and people here in West Michigan. And why not start it in Grand Rapids, not San Francisco, not New York? Why not in Grand Rapids, Michigan? It's 2025. What's next for the New Community Transformation Fund?
Well, another fund, actually, which could only happen given that the first fund has been successful, and it has been. And so the next thing is actually to raise a second fund to invest in more brilliant folks and entrepreneurs of color to continue to spread that, right? We have a relationship with Michigan Capital Network, which has been just really, really excellent. They've been like rocket fuel in our tank in terms of vetting deals, getting things done, to look at the right deals. An amazing team there, a lot of great and smart people. Paul D'Amato, Dill Grogan, and I mean, there's so many, Abid Ali. I mean, we've got some amazing folks, right? And so that's the next thing. We want to continue to do this. And, the thing is, too, Phil, we'd love to have other communities use this as a template, right? And so we are always ready on the phone if a community wants to take this forward and would like our help. That's what we want.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
Easy enough, yeah.
And this is just the beginning. As you just heard Scott say, you're going to hear from a number of those people in our upcoming episodes. Those are people not only who had meetings with the founders, Birgit and Scott, but they were true change makers in this amazing story of progress. And as you just heard Scott Welch say, now a new fund, a new major partner, this Michigan Capital Network. I mean, that is truly...
Well, that's a great organization. They've been...
Yeah, they really
started 20 years ago, I remember, as the Grand Angels, okay? Mm-hmm. The first angel investor network in West Michigan. It gave birth to other angel investor networks in Kalamazoo and in other parts of the state. And eventually, they all came together and said, we have to have a network. And so that became the Michigan Capital Network. And they now manage 4 funds, over $100 million. They have a staff of 10 or 12.
Yeah, I think it is.
Expertise in the biosciences, in fintech, etc. And we became an affiliate. They become our partner. They become our back room. So that, because building up a fund and the staff is very difficult, and that was to us the much more amenable solution. And it's brought us fantastic leads. And of course, we have a board. Scott and I are on the board, and we have an investment committee, community leaders, venture capitalists. Some of them are investors in the fund who look over these deals, because you have to have deal flow, and not every deal is a good deal, and somebody has to vet it, and that's what they do. And so we've got the infrastructure, if you will, together, and we can build on it with a second fund.
Absolutely. This is a series that will unpack a lot of these stories, as we said. I want to give each of you a chance to share a closing thought of why this is important. You can look back 5 years into the rearview mirror. Some of the key takeaways for you, Birgit Close.
I am very proud of the community and how it responded, to be quite honest. People stepped up. People believe in it. People said, we want to be part of it. And in spite of some of the naysayers on social media, I ignore them because it's working. And it's happening, as you said, in Grand Rapids, Michigan, where a lot of people think that it's, we are still living in 1955. We don't. We are a very progressive community. We are a growing community. We are a sophisticated community. And why not be leaders in this space? So that's what I'm very, very pleased about.
Your
and
thoughts?
Of course, I get to work with Scott.
Yeah, you get to work with Scott.
Yeah,
of course.
it makes it actually fun. But I think for me, again, having been born and raised here for the most part, it's one of those things where, to me, it's a huge affirmation for your community to say, we want to be a part of this, right? And so, and of course, no community is perfect, and there's so many different things and different dynamics. But what I can say is when we went after this idea, the community said yes, and they're still saying yes. And so I think what it does, because this is not a social program, I said, this is not a social fund, but it will have social impact, right? And so this is one of those opportunities, at least in my opinion, for West Michigan to really shine. And it's one thing to say, yeah, we're with you. It's another thing when people start writing checks, and that actually is another level of commitment. And that's one of the things I will always hold in my mind and heart, having seen that our community, it actually backed up what it said it was committed to.
Pretty wonderful and powerful thing. That is Scott Welch, joined along with Birgit Close. I want to thank both of them for being a part of this important, groundbreaking first episode of this podcast series, unpacking the story behind the New Community Transformation Fund. Big thank you to both of them for sharing their journey and their vision and leadership, creating a more equitable investment landscape. So in future episodes, you're going to be hearing from the founders, the funders, community leaders who are helping to turn that vision that these two had into reality. It is happening, one investment, one entrepreneur at a time. And best of all, if you enjoyed what you heard in this episode, don't forget to subscribe, leave a review, and share this with someone in your well-leveraged network of friends. You can also learn more about the New Community Transformation Fund and its mission at newcommunityfund.com and by following New Community Transformation Fund on social media. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next time right here.
Capital for Change is an iHeartRadio production.